Hello guys, welcome back to LR Anime. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of BTTH Rebirth of Emperor Yang episode number 199 based on novel. So let's start. Over the dilapidated mountain forest, a figure as fast as lightning rushed towards an old man in yellow robe in the void. Where the shadow passed, the invisible void was twisted, and then it collapsed in a dull sound. The power of terror, without any fighting spirit, is so terrible. Such power is really appalling. At this moment, even if the old man in yellow robe saw this scene, his heart was also shocked by it. The expression on his old face was very dignified. A trace of cold sweat was emerging uncontrollably from all over his body. From the moment when Xiao Yan uttered the startling dragon roar just now, the heart of the old man in yellow robe couldn't help trembling. His heart couldn't help being frightened. Was the person in front of him really human? With the human body, how can it withstand such terrible power, and how can it send out dragon roar? That's the symbol of the dragon family. Who is this young man in black? Although there are all kinds of questions in his heart, it's a pity that the old man in yellow robe has no time to take care of it at this time. Xiao Yan has already made a move. If he doesn't fight back, it will make people laugh generously. How can the strong man in the later stage of the great 8-star duty fear a 5-star duty who is already seriously injured? Even if Xiao Yan has the power to increase his growth after swallowing the dragon scales and fruits, under the power of his 8-star duty, the old man in yellow doesn't think he will lose. What's more, in addition to being an 8-star emperor himself, he is also a physical cultivator. Compared with the physical strength, even if he is not better than Xiao Yan at the moment, he will not be afraid of the former. Boy, let me see how much power your strange body can burst out after swallowing the dragon scales and fruit. The old man in yellow robe looked at Xiao Yan violently. While the sound of drinking fell, the fighting spirit in his body also poured out crazily at this moment and condensed into a red and yellow fighting armor. After finishing these, the old man quickly lifted his hands to his chest, linked his fingers, and printed the knot quickly. Then he roared up to the sky. Drink. Half a step is a beast's decision. With this long roar, on the old man's body surface, the invisible terrorist strength is rapidly condensed, and the invisible strength is constantly converging, just like the essence. At a glance, it looks like a pretty bear. However, the pretty bear can only cover the old man's left body. Perhaps, this is what he calls half-step. Roar. With the brute beast's determination, the half of the brute bear on the old man's body also gave a roar full of killing breath. Immediately, when the black figure in front of him was getting closer and closer, the old man suddenly moved, and the soles of his feet stepped heavily on the void. Then he rushed forward and collided with the oncoming dark figure. Boom! The terrible energy ripples spread around these two people and swept away the wind and cloud between heaven and earth in an instant. The two people did not give in to each other. Their momentum was fierce. Their strong fighting spirit and physical strength were equal in the face of Xiao Yan's simple violence. This blow, the two sides are even. This guy's physical strength has been so strong. The old man in yellow robe frowned and couldn't help showing a dignified color on his face. Such a powerful physical strength is incredible. Boy, is that all you have? Although he was dignified in his heart, the old man in yellow robe did not give in at all. At the same time, the power on his hands became more fierce, as if he was going to retreat Xiao Yan. I'm not sure how much power I have, but you should have only so much power. Hearing the speech, Xiao Yan sneered, and the look on his face suddenly became fierce. While the strength of the latter's hands increased, his clenched fists suddenly shook. In his arms, two huge forces immediately poured into the palm, and the terrible strength poured out like a broken bamboo. It was easy to destroy the power just gathered in the palm of the old man in yellow robe. Bang! Then, there was another dull bang between the two people. The old man in yellow robe almost flew upside down uncontrollably until he was 100 feet away. Then he stopped in embarrassment. A mouthful of blood also couldn't help spitting out from his mouth. The old man looked up and his eyes were full of panic. It's hard to imagine that Xiao Yan could be so strong in front of his later cultivation of the 8-star duty. He was not an opponent at all. How is it possible? On the other side, Xiao Yang stood proudly in the void at this time. He was full of war all over. The surging strength in his body continued to spread outward, impacting the originally calm void around him. Circle after circle of continuous space ripples spread around Xiao Yang's body. The powerful physical strength made the motionless invisible void tremble. Now Xiao Yang, after swallowing the dragon scale fruit, his physical strength has been greatly improved. Under the scouring of the dragon scale fruit, Xiao Yang's physical strength has reached the maximum limit he can bear now. In addition, with a great power image, the combination of the two, Xiao Yang's physical strength is even stronger to an unimaginable level of terror. These flesh and blood bodies are no less than an ordinary 9-star fighting emperor. Under this seemingly thin body, few people can compete with it even if they look at the whole western region. 8 stars, but so. Xiao Yang sneered faintly. The increasing effect brought by Li Xiangju was stronger than he thought. He thought that even if Li Xiangju's cultivation was successful, he could only improve his combat power to the later stage of the 8-star duty, but what he didn't expect was that he actually reached the early stage of the 9-star duty. Perhaps, it was also thanks to the effect of the dragon scale fruit. Under the impact of the powerful power of the dragon scale fruit, the force image has been improved a lot again to the greatest extent. Perhaps it is for this reason that Xiao Yang's combat power has been greatly improved. Boy, don't be too rampant. Even if you swallow the dragon scales and fruits, with your seriously injured body, if you persist for such a long time, the injuries in your body will only accumulate more seriously. You're digging your own grave. Hihi, you know I swallowed the dragon scale fruit. Don't you know what happened to my body? In the face of the yelling of the old man in yellow robe, Xiao Yang grinned coldly, and his words were full of disdain. Such inferior means are really ugly. Xiao Yang's words fell down in his mouth. The old man in yellow robe's eyes suddenly coagulated, and his face was obviously stunned. Then, he seemed to think of something, and the muscles in the corners of his eyes twitched violently. Damn it. Even so, the 5-star duty is the 5-star duty. In front of the 8-star duty, it's just a mole ant. The yellow-robed old man roared reluctantly. He didn't believe that with his cultivation of the 8-star duty, he could not even clean up a seriously injured 5-star duty. If it was spread, what face would he have to haunt the western regions in the future? Boy, I don't believe it. Without fighting spirit, you can carry my fighting skills alone. The old man was furious. His fighting spirit gushed out of his body without reservation. His hands quickly formed a seal. Soon, his body flashed and came to Xiao Yang. His hands turned over and turned into palms. He fell hard on Xiao Yang's chest. Facing the fierce attack of the old man in yellow robe, Xiao Yang did not retreat but advance. He clenched his hands and his body suddenly shook. The invisible vigorous qi condensed into a slightly illusory vigorous mask on the body surface. At the same time, he waved his fists and collided with the old man in yellow robe's fighting skills. Dang dang. The sound of fierce collision is constantly heard in the void. Xiao Yang and the old man in yellow robe come and go, fist to fist and palm to palm. The earth-shaking explosion is constantly heard in the void, making the invisible void crack and collapse again and again. However, the battle between the two people has not seen the victory or defeat for a long time. Until a certain moment. Bang! Xiao Yang and the old man in yellow robe punched each other on the chest. Their powerful fighting skills smashed the invisible gang mask on Xiao Yang's body surface, and then fell on Xiao Yang's chest. At the same time, Xiao Yang's powerful fist also attacked the old man's fighting skill armor. The same scene appeared. The yellow-robed old man glared at each other, and the fist that fell on Xiao Yang's chest suddenly shook. The surging fighting spirit immediately gushed out of the palm of his hand, and he wanted to blow Xiao Yang back. However, buzzing. After the surging fighting energy bombarded Xiao Yang, it just set off a fierce fighting ripple on Xiao Yang's body surface. The fighting spirit of the old man in yellow robe was solved by Xiao Yang with his effort. What? The boy's body is incredibly. Seeing this scene, the old man in yellow robe trembled violently. Xiao Yang shocked him, but there were too many. Hihi, I'd better come. Xiao Yang smiled coldly, and his arms suddenly shook. The terrible force suddenly poured out of his arm, just like the yellow river burst, and hit the old man in yellow robe on his chest. Bang! With a deep burst bang, the robe in front of the yellow-robed old man's chest suddenly turned into debris, the pupil suddenly tightened to the size of a needle tip, an old face became red, blood could not help gushing out of his mouth, and his body bowed in an instant. Then, it flew upside down like a shell. In situ, Xiao Yan took back his fist with a sneer, gently held his wrist and twisted it, with a satisfied look on his face. Here, it is a dilapidated mountain forest washed by powerful energy. At a glance, there are many gullies and scars on the ground. Even from the traces on the ground, we can clearly see the huge impact of the energy attack. It is shocking. In the ruins at this time, a figure of an old man covered with blood and extremely unstable breath is falling into a huge pit. From his position, it seems that the pit is caused by the diffusion of the powerful force on his body after he fell. It is surprising that the old man can survive such an amazing force. Cough, cough, cough. How can it be? No matter how strong the physical strength is, it can never be so strong. I've worked hard on my physical body for 100 years, and I've never reached such a position, but it's impossible for you to be a hairy boy. The old man got up from the ground, looked up at the sky, trembled his fingers, pointed to the fuzzy shadow above the sky, and said hoarsely in a trembling voice, "Oh." High in the sky, under the sunshine, we can't see the expression on the man's face directly from the front, but from the sound, we can hear a little irony. It seems that you have lived to be a dog for 100 years. How can the strength of the flesh be proved by time alone? Even if it is 100 years, if you don't practice and rely on foreign things alone, you can't be really strong long ago. Then, cold laughter came out, and the figure in the sky turned slightly. The sun shone and reflected a young face. It's Xiao Yan. Bastard. You are just a hairy boy. How can you judge me like this? Bang. This is my qualification. At the moment when the words in the old man's mouth had just fallen, Xiao Yan suddenly grasped his right palm in the void, and his terrible strength immediately poured out. Almost at the same time, the invisible void within a few feet around his palm collapsed. The powerful power has the right to speak at any time. Xiao Yan knows this. At this moment, his hand instantly suppresses the old people who want to fight back. Cold sweat poured out from his forehead. The old man gasped violently while looking at Xiao Yan again with angry eyes. Boy, I admit that you are indeed the most powerful fighting emperor I have ever seen in my life. If you are allowed to grow up like this, I believe that even the old thief LV Zhongtian will be trampled under your feet in less than 3 years. The muscles in the corners of the old man's eyes twitched slightly, and the two bare palms slowly clenched, as if suppressing the pain in his body. At the same time, the fighting spirit in his body also surged rapidly. However, no matter what you do today, you will certainly die in my hand. At the moment when the words fell in his mouth, the old man's face suddenly became gloomy. 2 dry palms were quickly raised to his chest, 10 fingers linked, and the printing formula changed. With the printing of the old man's fingertips, the astringent and cumbersome seals are quickly played out in his hands. At the same time, in the void above the old man's head, the huge fighting energy is rapidly condensed and faintly converged into a slightly illusory finger shape. Boy, since you swallowed the dragon scales and fruits, let's have a try. I also got this volume of fighting skills from this auction. Who is better, you and me? The original invisible fingers gradually became angular, and the outline of a huge finger became more and more clear. At the same time, there was an extremely ancient and huge momentum, which made people feel a huge pressure coming face to face. Spirit-level advanced fighting skills, bridging the gap. The old man drank violently again, almost falling in his mouth. At the same time, a burst of extremely dazzling blue light also appeared on the huge fingers suspended above his head. The momentum of terror spread like a tide, and the atmosphere between heaven and earth became dignified again in an instant. Such a huge force could not help but feel moved even when Xiao Yan saw it at the moment. Mi Huang means that you are the one who got it. Seeing this huge blue finger, Xiao Yan immediately remembered the mysterious strong man who took it at the auction that day. At that time, he took out a volume of Italian-level fighting skills. The appearance of that thing shocked everyone present. However, this guy clearly knew that it was useless for him to keep the fighting skills of water attribute. He might as well auction what he needed, and this finger was right in his heart. In a week's time, although I didn't dare to say it was clear, with his ability, he was able to show his power. Staring at the huge blue finger, he felt the strong momentum from it. Xiao Yan's face finally showed a solemn color. Although the old guy hasn't understood the essence of the famine finger, it is an advanced fighting skill of the spirit level after all. It itself is particularly good. This alone is enough for Xiao Yan to pay attention to. At present, the fighting spirit in his body has not recovered too much, which is not enough for him to use 7 times to break the sky ruler, and the fighting skills he can use his physical strength are only 8 pole collapse, which is far from enough to resist this famine finger. In this way, we can only rely on brute force to resist. Thinking of this, Xiao Yan couldn't help moving slightly. But at this time, the huge finger rushed towards Xiao Yan fiercely. Seeing this scene, Xiao Yan took a deep breath and calmed his heart completely. His hands were raised slowly, and then with the rotation of his mind, cumbersome knots were played out at a lightning speed. At the same time, the vast terror force in his body seemed to be commanded and condensed rapidly at the moment. The breeze came and stirred up Xiao Yan's black robe, revealing his thin and healthy body. At this moment, as the terrible strength in Xiao Yan's body began to condense, a thin layer of golden brilliance gradually condensed out on Xiao Yan's chest. That thin layer of brilliance is like a gauze covering Xiao Yan's body surface. At the same time, it can be clearly seen that every skin and muscle of Xiao Yan's whole body becomes tight at this moment. With the coverage of that layer of gauze, it reflects a metallic luster. Without relying on fighting spirit, Xiao Yan, with his huge strength, actually condensed a layer of gauze-like substance, which is also his only defense against the famine finger at the moment. In the distant sky, a huge blue finger rushed into the sky from bottom to top, and the violent spatial ripples spread from the circumference of the blue finger, just like throwing into the lake of boulders and setting off a circle of surging waves. Amazing momentum permeated from this finger. Those terrible forces were like volcanic eruptions, full of destructive forces. It seemed that they wanted to destroy everything in front of them. Hurricanes in heaven and earth are all around this huge blue finger. At this moment, in front of this huge finger, a figure in gold gauze is standing impressively. Looking carefully, it turned out that the figure was not wearing a golden gauze, but was shrouded in a faint layer of golden brilliance on his body surface. The golden radiance dyed his whole body into a golden color. From a distance, it looks like a golden man made of gold, which gives people an indestructible feeling. However, at this moment, the goal of this huge cyan finger is undoubtedly the figure in front of us. On the ground below, the old man was surprised to see that Xiao Yang on the void showed this appearance. With such a light golden light, does Xiao Yang still want to resist his famine? Although he couldn't believe it in his heart, the old man also understood that from the strength shown by Xiao Yang, the latter was not the kind of arrogant person. Since he could resist his attack with such a thin layer of gold yarn alone, it showed that the gold yarn that seemed to break at one blow was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. Thinking of this in his heart, the old man immediately sank down and thought. All the remaining fighting spirit poured into the huge green fingers in the sky. The dazzling green light burst out in time, shining the heaven and earth into a green color. At present, all the fighting spirit in his body has been contained in the cyan fingers. After a blow, regardless of success or failure, he will fall into a state of lack of fighting spirit. Mi Huang refers to who can stand in the end between him and Xiao Yang. On the void, the distance between the huge blue fingers and Xiao Yang is getting closer and closer. In a twinkling, they have come to the latter. At this moment, the distance between the two is less than 1 meter. The nerves of Xiao Yang and the old man were also stretched to the extreme at this moment. Finally, when the huge blue fingers were coming, Xiao Yang suddenly raised his arms and crossed them in front of his chest. The strength in his body gathered frantically. Then, the two collided. Bang! The earth-shaking noise resounded through, and the terrible energy storm swept away in an instant, like a huge wave, destroying the dilapidated earth below again. The mountains and forests collapsed and burned, and nearly 1,000 miles of mountains and forests were razed to the ground. You can see it from the inside. The horror of spirit-level fighting skills can be displayed at this moment. In the sky, a strong cyan fighting wave covered a large area of the sky, and the energy exploded continuously. The explosions sound like thunder spread continuously between the heaven and earth. It was not until a long time later that the heaven and earth returned to silence. Cough. Is it over? On the ground, the old man with a pale face climbed up hard from the ground, gasped violently in his mouth, raised his head quickly, and looked for in the heavy blue clouds. When he was sure that there was no breath fluctuation, he breathed a long sigh of relief in his heart, and his old face couldn't help showing a smile like the rest of his life after the tragic victory. In this way, the final result is finally. Hum. Suddenly, between heaven and earth, a violent trembling sound sounded. On the ground, the old man's eyes suddenly coagulated, and the smile just appeared on his face gradually solidified at this moment. Deep in his heart, it seemed as if something had exploded. On a pale old face, his look gradually became grey. High above the sky, the blue energy fog was swept away under a strong wind, and all the energy that has not dissipated was dissolved and melted between the heaven and the earth. Then, a figure covered with purple and gold was exposed to the air. Looking at his face, Xiao Yan is no doubt. The purple and golden light covering his whole body is the Dragon Phoenix ancient armor. However, from now on, even if he has the Dragon Phoenix ancient armor to protect his body, he still leaves a lot of scars on Xiao Yan under the famine finger. The scales and armor on his chest were forcibly torn off, and the flesh and blood under them were also exposed to the air, which looked particularly miserable. However, looking back, under the bombardment of the advanced fighting skills of the spirit level, he only suffered some skin injuries. This alone is enough to make Xiao Yan feel proud. Soon, under the repair of different fire and the terrible repair power obtained after swallowing the dragon scales and fruits, at the moment, the wounds in Xiao Yan's chest are recovering rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Looking at Xiao Yan's slightly pale face, it is also gradually recovering. Of course, the only constant is that the muscles in the corners of his mouth are still twitching uncontrollably. Although his repair ability became much stronger, the severe pain from the wound still made him unbearable. Back to his mind, Xiao Yan looked down and looked at the old man who was weak at this time. Why? This time, the look on the old man's face no longer fluctuated much, and all the hopes and beggars at the bottom of his heart dissipated at this moment. As an 8-star Dipper Emperor, the top strongman in the western regions, he has lost everything today, but he made all this by himself. From the beginning, he shouldn't have come to this black-robed young man who looked seriously injured. Lower down, Xiao Yan walked towards the old man step by step and came to the front. The injury on his chest had fully recovered. His heart was moved. The purple and gold scales all over his body dispersed in the twinkling of an eye. Then, behind him, a golden shadow suddenly rose. The golden virtual image is a giant god standing behind Xiao Yan. The light golden light emitted from it is the same as the thin golden gauze covered on Xiao Yan. However, perhaps because of the different physique, the golden light on the virtual image is much dimmer. So, is that so? The old man nodded weakly, and immediately fell to the ground. Then, Xiao Yan smiled indifferently, turned his head and looked at the golden virtual shadow behind him. He thought a move and took it back. This golden virtual shadow is one of the 4 saints' image decisions, which is famous for defense. Golden elephant. Between the 10,000 Mu mountains and forests, in a mountain range rarely visited by people, somewhere, in front of a huge cave, a human figure fell rapidly from high altitude, and then fell heavily to the ground. Although the body looks a little embarrassed, the power is also powerful and terrible. At the bottom of the pit, a figure dressed in black robes was half kneeling here. When the terrible force on his body was removed, the figure stood up from the ground panting. Roar! Humans, get out of here! At the moment when the figure got up, there was a hostile roar from the depths of the cave in front of him. The roar was like thunder, rolling in, blowing a thick piece of dust and sweeping away towards the figure in the pit. Who? Just when the dust and fog hit, there was a sudden breeze rising around the figure, which swept the dust and fog into the air, condensed into a long dragon, and burst in the distance. The figure raised his face and looked at the deepest part of the cave with dark eyes. The pale face wore a tired look. After repeated wars, although the repair ability of the body had been enhanced a lot, the huge consumption of fighting spirit and physical strength still made Xiao Yang fall into a weak state. Now, he urgently needs to find a place to recover quietly, but before that, he has to take something first. Without stopping, Xiao Yang went straight to the inside of the cave. Among them, the Warcraft who just shouted angrily was also angry by Xiao Yang's move. "Little human, how dare you be presumptuous here and seek death?" The heavy roar of the beast came from the depths of the cave. Then, a violent wave of fighting spirit rushed out from the depths of the cave. Xiao Yang ignored it directly. He was dressed in a black robe without movement and walked steadily as usual. Then, a huge beast appeared in front of Xiao Yang with heavy steps. Shua. However, without waiting for the giant beast to move, Xiao Yang bent his fingers and shot a purple and golden figure, which was like a shell, and drove the giant beast back. Boom! With a loud noise, the mountain above Xiao Yang's head suddenly shook violently. The huge body of the giant beast was deeply blasted into the mountain. Bang bang bang! Then, a few more explosions sounded. The sound sounded like boxing to meat. The dull collision made people feel a burst of flesh pain. In the dull collision sound, there was also a sad roar. You can hear how painful the giant beast is at the moment. The heart read a move, and the collision sound in the depths of the cave stopped. Then a burst of broken wind sounded, and the North King quickly returned to Xiao Yang's side. He kept walking until Xiao Yang came to the giant beast, which stopped again. He turned his head and looked. At the moment, the giant beast was being embedded in the mountain with scars, and the low pain hiss kept ringing. "It's just a skin injury. I can't die." Xiao Yang's face was indifferent and his tone was plain. Hearing the speech, the huge beast in front of him couldn't help shaking. Although the sound sounded harmless to humans and animals, it was frightened after seeing the power of the North King. The beast's body gradually shrunk, and then turned into a middle-aged man. However, at the moment, the man was blue, and he didn't dare to look at the person in front of him. "Big. Sir, the small one has eyes and doesn't know Mount Tai, please." "Okay, I don't want to talk nonsense with you. If I want to live, I'll go out and guard. Don't let anyone near. In addition, I'll borrow your washing tendons to use." He quickly ordered Xiao Yang to enter the depths of the cave without any hesitation. After hearing Xiao Yang's words, the middle-aged man stayed in place for a long time and fell to the bottom of the valley in an instant. However, in the end, under Xiao Yang's strong pressure, he withdrew from the cave with grievances, but he didn't dare to escape alone, so he had to stay at the cave mouth obediently. Helpless, he was first broken into the cave, and then beaten for no reason. Now he even opened his mouth and asked for his things. Who can bear this kind of thing? If it wasn't for the suppression of the other party's strength, he would have been desperate. However, in order to survive, he endured it after all. Life is like this. A painful blow will always appear in front of you at an unexpected moment, so that you have no time to make any preparations, but this is the price of survival. Deep in the cave, Xiao Yang went straight to a seemingly insignificant boulder in the cave and ordered the North King to remove the boulder. Immediately, under the boulder, a huge stone pond appeared in front of Xiao Yang. The stone pool was filled with white powder like lime. As the boulder was removed, a strange smell came out of it. Smelling the strange smell from the air, Xiao Yang's face didn't show a strange look. On the contrary, a touch of surprised color flashed in the depths of his eyes. This gluten washing powder is much more than he expected. In this way, his demand is enough. After repeated wars, although Xiao Yang's combat power has improved a lot in this process, the injuries in all parts of his body are also extremely amazing. It doesn't matter if he is injured. It only takes a period of time to recover from the injuries suffered by the internal organs in his body. In addition, the meridians in Xiao Yang's body have also suffered a lot of trauma in the previous wars. It's not easy to recover just by virtue of his own repair ability. As for the pill for repairing meridians, although Xiao Yang has it, it can't play a fundamental role because the product level is too low. Therefore, he found it all the way here. Shijin powder, just like its name, has the magical effect of washing tendons and cutting marrow. The efficacy contained in it can be integrated into the meridians and bones of the human body, enhance the physique and increase the overall toughness. Many pills used to expand meridians often choose Shijin powder as the main raw material. Of course, that effect can only be achieved after Xiao Yang refined it into pills. Before that, its role was limited to repairing and increasing the toughness of meridians. However, with Xiao Yang's current situation, it is obviously impossible to refine it into a pill. Therefore, we can only choose to devour and refine it directly. There was no choice. Xiao Yang didn't hesitate. When he opened his mouth, the suction in his mouth suddenly burst out. A large mass of powder was inhaled into his mouth by Xiao Yang. Then, like a large mass of sand, it was swallowed by Xiao Yang with an extremely ugly face. At the moment of washing tendons and dispersing into the body, those powders quickly turned into a stream of yellowish-brown strange energy and ran around Xiao Yang's body. When the huge energy was constantly flowing, it even affected the injury that had not recovered in Xiao Yang's body, making the latter's face uncontrollable for a violent convulsion. Clenching his teeth, Xiao Yang tried to resist the pain in his body and began to mobilize the different fire in the cyclone to drive all the milky energy to the location of various meridians in his body. Then he used the different fire to refine slowly. This video will end here.